The Council on Women and Girls that you headed and started, it's not there anymore, I presume, right?
Not to my knowledge, no.
How does that make you feel?
Part of what we tried to do, Bonnie, with the council is to create a movement outside of the White House and so that it would continue no matter who succeeded President Obama. So we knew that there would be momentum that built outside of Washington, and that's what it was always all about, is that we the people, yes, we can.
Hello, I'm Bonnie Erbay. Welcome to the Contrary. This week, a conversation with a major thought leader on women and girls issues, Valerie Jarrett, former senior advisor to President Obama and head of the White House Council on Women and Girls. Welcome, welcome.
Thank you, Bonnie. Thank you so much for putting a spotlight on this issue.
Well, tell us, and thank you for what you do. Tell us what you're doing now. Not just in terms of women and girls, but other major issues.
Well, one of the things I'm doing is helping President Obama launch his Obama Center, which will be a platform for civic engagement around issues that are important to all of us. There are issues that I care much about. Gender equity is one, criminal justice is another one, reducing gun violence another one, and civic engagement more broadly. And so I'm traveling around the country and, in fact, the world, talking about issues that I care a great deal about.
And what are you seeing these days? Progress or
well,
going
it's
backwards?
Mixed. It's mixed. I think, we're in a bit of a zig or a zag here in Washington, but I'm heartened to see all around the country so many people who recognize that it's up to them to perfect our union and that they have to roll up their sleeves and work hard. I was in New York recently at this event sponsored by Paradigm for Parity, 51 different companies, all committed to increasing the percentage of women represented at senior levels in the companies as well as on their board of directors, closing the pay gap, recognizing that how are we going to be globally competitive unless we level the playing field and we have all of our talent on the playing field.
And with 51, I would assume, major
Yes.
corporations agreeing to do this, how much closer does that get us? And how quickly have they committed to doing it?
Well, let's put this in perspective. First of all, only 6% of Fortune 500 companies are women. So the CEOs are women. And so we have a long way to go before we have gender equity. But I think what's heartening to see is with 51 companies, and that number is growing every day, there's a recognition by people who are in positions of authority that gender equity is a strength. That this isn't doing this because it's good for women, it's doing it because it's good for business, because there's also mounting evidence that shows that businesses that have gender equity are more profitable. And so you can make a business case for it, and therefore it's good for working families, it's good for women, it's good for business, it's good for our economy. And let's face it, right now, Bonnie, you can live anywhere and work anywhere. And if your goal as somebody who's running a company is to have the best talent you can have, then ensuring you have gender equity will enhance your chances of being profitable.
Now, also diversity obviously is a huge issue for you. Where do you see the country headed on that? I mean, for example, I look at the cabinet, the Trump cabinet, and it is so much less diverse than anything going back to even George W. Bush's first cabinet.
Well, I think that diversity is a strength. I think that, again, in a global marketplace, you're going to make better decisions if you're surrounded by people who reflect that marketplace. We have a very diverse country. And I know when President Obama was in office, it was important to him to have his cabinet and his senior team at the White House reflect the diversity of that country so that he would receive ideas from all around and all perspectives before he makes an important decision. As I talk to CEOs today, I'm heartened to see that increasingly they are appreciating that diversity is a strength as well, and that when they want to compete from not just our shores, but all shores, they better make sure that the decision makers who are advising them, again, reflect that diversity. And so are we where we should be? Absolutely not. I think, are we heading in the right direction in terms of the private sector's recognition? Sure.
Now tell me, when you went to the White House, was there already a Council on Women and Girls?
No.
Or did you create it?
No, President Obama created it in March of 2009, just a couple months after his inauguration. And it was with the recognition that with the vast number of federal agencies that he wanted to make sure that each and every one of them was focusing on gender equity. So all of our programs, all of our policies, legislation that we supported, he wanted us to look at it through that gender lens and say, are we improving the life for women and girls in everything we're doing?
Did you have to push him to do it?
No, my goodness, no. And I think part of it is because, look, he was raised by a single mom. He spent time living with his grandparents and his grandmother. He watched her frustration as she worked for a bank with a high school education, but, really smart. And she trained people who then leapfrogged over her. And so he saw her sadness. And then he's married to this extraordinary wife who appreciates the struggles of raising children while trying to have a job before she came here to Washington when they were young in particular. And then he's got these two girls, and he wants to make sure that they are able to compete on a level playing field. So I think he came to this quite naturally. He recognized the fact that it had never been done before, and he wanted to make sure that we did it in a comprehensive, holistic way.
Well, today, as we continue our celebration of International Women's History Month, I'm proud to sign this executive order establishing the White House Council on Women and Girls. It's a council with a mission that dates back to our founding to fulfill the promise of our democracy for all our people. I sign this order not just as a president, but as a son, a grandson, a husband, and a father. It's not enough to only have individual women's offices at individual agencies or only have one office in the White House. Rather, as former Secretary of State Madeleine Albright once said, in our government, responsibility for the advancement of women is not the job of any one agency, it's the job of all of them. All right, so I'm going to go sign this thing. Thank you very much.
The Council on Women and Girls is made up of the heads of all cabinet-level agencies and White House offices. The Council's mission is to ensure that all of the federal agencies take into account the needs of women and girls in developing policies, programs, and legislation.
So we focused on everything from working with media and toy companies to try to deal with these implicit biases that we see in our children's, play and entertainment. What can we do to make sure that science is cool again? And there are great photographs of President Obama at the science fair with these young girls, 5-year-old girls with their capes, getting ready to change the world. And he said, I want to lift them up and make them appreciate the fact that they can reach for the stars, literally reach for the stars. We focused on sexual assault on college campuses. 1 in 5 women are sexually assaulted while in college. Well, that's devastating. What can we do to make sure every teenage girl reaches high to go to college? And First Lady Michelle Obama had an initiative called Reach Higher and Better Make Room to make sure that you really are appreciating your full potential and living up to it. And we know how important education is for that. And entrepreneurship, women entrepreneurs who are out there. We wanted to expand their opportunity and their access to capital, and also importantly, healthcare.
Tell me about healthcare, women and girls. It's such women. I mean, it's a so well repeated all over the place. Everybody knows, or I would hope everybody knows.
Well,
women make 80% of the healthcare decisions for the family.
That's exactly right. So when President Obama was crafting the Affordable Care Act, it was important to him, again, just as I said with everything, that we looked at it through a gender lens. And so as the Affordable Care Act was implemented, an outside group of professional experts said that it was important to provide preventative care, as they defined it, available to women, and that if we're focusing on the overall health of our population, preventative care is a key part of that. And so the Affordable Care Act has provisions in it that ensure that women can have screening for cancer, routine annual wellness visits, birth control, counseling for domestic violence, all without any additional copay. And that's important so that we can incentivize women to take care of themselves. And that's now all at risk, as we know, as Congress is looking at repealing it and putting in place something else. And the question we always say is, are you making life better? Are you making life better for the women that you're there to represent? And if you're not, then don't do it. And one of the provisions proposed is to take funding away from Planned Parenthood. Well, we know that millions of people are served by Planned Parenthood every day. Why would you want to take that opportunity away from them?
And what do you see happening when and if this all comes to pass, that the Planned Parenthood budget is zeroed out at some point, that clinics start closing all over the country, which some already have in rural areas?
I think it will be devastating.
But I mean, politically, we saw, for example, the Women's March the day after President Trump's inauguration. Do you see marches, protests,
absolutely,
violence breaking out?
Well, I hope not violence. I hope that the demonstrations are peaceful. But what I really think about, I understand your question about asking about politics, but let's first look at the impact that it's going to have on millions of people around our country. We want women to have access to that preventive care. We want women to be able to go in for those routine exams. And so if you take away a major vehicle by which that service is delivered, it's going to have a devastating impact. I have met women who've gone to Planned Parenthood and detected breast cancer, for example, early, and they are living today. Well, what if they don't have access to that clinic and don't go in and get that exam? They will die. And so recognizing just how serious the consequences are of what seems to be a political football, the Affordable Care Act should never have been embodied in politics in the first place. Why wouldn't we want every American to have affordable health care? Why is that a political issue? That should be a right in a country as great and as wealthy as ours. And what's happening now is that right is at risk. And it's going to have impact in disproportionate ways, affecting women and people who are middle income and poor, and we shouldn't do it. And so, yes, there will be a reaction, but I'm seeing a reaction right now, and I'm hoping that reaction will keep the members of Congress from doing the wrong thing.
When you were in the White House, I know you weren't in legislative affairs, but you dealt with Congress. What was your biggest success, do you think?
Well, we did have many, particularly early on. It was important to have legislation go through that righted our economy. I think the Affordable Care Act will go down in history as one of the more important initiatives.
That was a a partisan vote.
Well, you know what? Let's talk about that, because I hear that a lot, particularly lately. It was a partisan vote because the Republican leadership would not allow their members to support it, even though we made over 200 amendments to the Affordable Care Act at the request of Republicans. We had hundreds of meetings debating this very complicated piece of business, designing it in a way that we could elicit bipartisan support. And what ended up happening, frankly, at the end is that the Republican leadership said, under no conditions will we support President Obama's legislation. And so it should have been bipartisan. It was modeled after Massachusetts that was put in place under Governor Romney, traditionally a Republican piece of legislation. And so it was bipartisan. They simply just didn't vote for it.
Do you think that the Obama presidency made partisan divisions greater than they were?
I don't think his presidency made it that way. I think, as we've heard told very early on in his administration, perhaps even the day of the inauguration, Leader McConnell had a meeting with many of his colleagues, and he said, our number one objective is to ensure that President Obama is not reelected. Well, that's why they couldn't vote for the Affordable Care Act. That's why they couldn't vote for what had been traditionally bipartisan initiatives, such as infrastructure, for example, is because they made up their mind just to say no to him. So it didn't have to do with his presidency. It had to do with a political decision made by the Republicans, one which I believe put their short-term political interests ahead of what was good for our country and our nation's people.
Now, let's get back to the Council on Women and Girls that you headed and started. It's not there anymore, I presume, right?
Not to my knowledge, no.
How does that make you feel?
Well, part of what we tried to do, Bonnie, with the Council is to create an a movement outside of the White House, and so that it would continue no matter who succeeded President Obama. So before President Obama left office in 2016, we held the United State of Women. We had 5,000 people come to Washington to the convention center and countless others who participated online on our platform to talk about what are the issues that are so important to women and girls and how could we move those issues forward throughout the country. So at state and local levels of government, in the private sector, through advocacy, through academic institutions who do research, our philanthropic community have come together focusing, for example, on women and girls of color and putting in place ways of addressing the unique challenges that they face. And so we knew that there would be momentum that built outside of Washington. And that's what it was always all about, is that we, the people, yes, we can. And so we're heartened to say that the United State of Women is now a 501c3. It is living and breathing, and we're having galvanizing summits across the country, which will lead to another big summit before the end of the year.
And how are you translating that into political action, if at all, for these women and girls?
Well, I think the issue is really one of initially substance. Of course, women and girls are going to be active politically as well, but our goal through the United State of Women is to focus on the issues and to try to do it in a way where it's a big tent. I mean, if you take an issue like affordable childcare or paid leave or paid sick days, we're still the only developed country in the world that doesn't have a federal paid leave policy. Equal pay. These should not be partisan issues. These should be issues that are important to everyone in our country. Women now contribute so mightily to the family income, where half the workforce, 40% of working moms, are either the sole or primary breadwinner. So a woman's contribution to the family income is more important than ever. And so the point that we are trying to make is to look at this from the perspective of what's good for the country, our economy, our businesses, and our working families, and to create a big tent so everyone is welcome. Now, for those who don't choose to participate, for those who fight against providing preventive care for women, to those who fight against a national policy for equal pay or paid leave, there may be some political consequences. I certainly hope so, because I don't believe that they're looking out for the best interests of our country.
I wonder what you thought when at least one of the earlier versions of the Republican health care plan didn't cover maternity benefits.
Well, that's ridiculous, right? It's ridiculous. And I met a woman a couple of weeks ago who told me that she had her baby and she was insured under the Affordable Care Act. And as a result, she received prenatal care and her delivery and her postnatal care. She's going to have a healthier baby. She's going to be healthier as a result of that. And again, in this great country, why don't we want that for every mom?
And let's get back to also one question I wanted to ask you about. It wasn't directly under your purview as head of the White House Council on Women and Girls, but at the State Department, there was I believe, 22 staff department around the ambassadorship that Secretary Clinton created, I'm sure with your involvement,
yes,
right?
Absolutely.
Around the Global Ambassador for Women's Issues. And that money was stripped out of the budget, and the office essentially already has closed down, even before the budget was finally approved.
Well, obviously that's very disappointing. The rest of the world looks to the United States to lead. And on issues having to do with women and girls, we have always had a leadership role. And our hope is to share best practices and encourage other nations to follow our lead. And while I was there, we worked very closely with the State Department in connection with the UN General Assembly. We convened other countries who pledged with us that they were going to make equity a priority. And so people look to us as that beacon of hope and that beacon of leadership. And that light has dimmed. And so the leadership is going to, again, have to come from the people of the United States and the people around the world who recognize it is truly in their self-interest to prioritize equity for women and girls.
Our executive producer, Carrie Stein, went on a trip with then Secretary Clinton to Peru, where she, and it was just a 24-hour trip, where she flew down, went to a couple of places where women-owned factories and women-owned businesses are those, and made a public show of U.S. support for those kinds of ventures. What impact without that kind of support going on? Will these businesses just continue to thrive without American support, or will there really be something lost there? Will they suffer? Will they close?
Well, it depends. I think there's a big void, and the question is who steps in to fill that void. And so under our Equal Futures initiative, we had a lot of support from the business community and the philanthropic community. And so my hope is that they will step up.
But is the business community going to, like Walmart, for example, has supports female entrepreneurs in terms of whom it uses as suppliers around the world. So
yes,
will the fact that that's still going on make up for anything the White House or the State Department was doing?
I think it's really important. I've been down to Walmart and I participated in their forum where they focused on how they are literally creating women-owned businesses around the world because they have this huge buying power. And so I hope that in that respect, Walmart will become a model. And there are many other companies that are recognizing that when they do this, not only are their workforces happier, but their customers are happier. We're seeing a lot more demand in the marketplace for equity. And so my hope is that that provides a check and balance too, that creates an incentive for the private sector to step up to the plate. But again, do we have a void? Sure we do. Are many of us committed to filling that void outside of Washington? Absolutely.
Can it be done?
I think it can be done, but it shouldn't have to be done. We should have leadership coming.
How can it be done?
Well, because other people are going to have to fill in the blanks. And so, for example, there are many companies in the financial service area that are very helpful in teaching entrepreneurship. Goldman Sachs, for example, has a 10,000 Women in a 10,000 Business initiative where they provide the kind of technical assistance necessary for those businesses to have access to capital, to appreciate how to do a business plan, to expand and grow. And so what we would hope is that there would be others who would follow that lead and create opportunities for women and girls around not just our country, but the world.
Goldman Sachs has a big program and actually is a supporter of not us individually, but PBS with the 10,000 Women program that it has. Can they show that helps them, build fortunes and take over companies and do all the financial things that they do?
Well, I'm pretty sure that if they didn't think it was in their self-interest, they wouldn't do it. And I think that's the case with most businesses. They do what they think is good for business. But I also think I'm heartened to say, and maybe because I'm from Chicago where we have such a strong civic business community, that corporate citizenship is important too. We often talk about the fact that citizen is the most important office of all. President Obama said that not long before he left office. But corporate citizenship is important as well. And so having corporations who recognize that their brand is associated with how they give back to the community and that they will be judged accordingly enhances their image and therefore their bottom line.
So do you think, is Goldman Sachs becoming the wealth advisor for a lot of young women entrepreneurs? Are they showing that there's a payback?
That I don't know. You'd have to check with them about that. But what I would say is that there are many, many corporations, small, medium, and large around our country who recognize the value in giving back, who recognize the value in helping others follow their lead, paying it forward, paying it back, as however you want to describe it, and then modeling that kind of good behavior. And part of what we want to do with the United States of Women Summit is to show what works. And we did that last year when we had it here in Washington. Who are the businesses that are really cracking this nut of getting senior women in positions of authority within the company? How do they do it? How do they develop the pipeline?
And how do the women do when they are in those senior positions?
And what is the culture in the company? I have always said that tone starts at the top. Mm-hmm. And if you have a CEO who says that diversity is a strength and is prepared to stand behind and create the kind of initiatives that lead to a diverse workforce, and then they show how they did that to other companies, that's successful, so that you can take these solutions to scale. And we want to put a spotlight on what works and help others follow those leads.
Thank you for all your positive leadership and your thought leadership in this area.
Thank you, Bonnie. I appreciate it.
Thanks for watching this edition of To the Contrary. Please follow us on Twitter at Bonnie Urbay, at To the Contrary. Please visit our pbs.org/To the Contrary website. And whether you agree or think to the contrary, Please join us next week.